Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here's a look at some of the top stories we have lined up for you tonight. Tensions rise in the Middle East between Israel and Iran, but President Trump won't say whether the U.S. could be drawn into the conflict. Plus, Canada renews diplomatic ties with India, but our spy agency says India is still a foreign interference threat. And heartbreak inside and outside the locker room as the Oilers lose another Stanley Cup Final.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. Tonight, we begin in the Middle East and the ongoing tensions between Israel and Iran. U.S. President Donald Trump is refusing to answer questions on whether he will order U.S. attacks on Iranian nuclear sites following similar attacks by Israel earlier this week. While speaking with reporters at the White House, he kept his cards very close to his chest.
I may do it, I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that Iran's got a lot of trouble. And they want to negotiate. And I said, why didn't you negotiate with me before? All this death and destruction. Why didn't you negotiate? I said to the people, why didn't you negotiate with me 2 weeks ago? You could have done fine. You would have had a country. Nothing's finished until it's finished. You know, war is very complex. A lot of bad things can happen. A lot of turns are made. So I don't know. I wouldn't say that we won anything yet. I would say that we sure as hell made a lot of progress. And we'll see. The next week is going to be very big, maybe less than a week.
Iran's supreme leader has rejected U.S. calls for surrender in the face of continued Israeli strikes and warned that any military involvement by the U.S. could cause irreparable damage to them. The Associated Press' John Gambrell explains.
Iran is doubling down, saying that it must maintain its right to enrich uranium. That's even as the threat of U.S. airstrikes looms as this Israeli campaign targeting the country continues. We've heard from Iranian officials all the way up to Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, warning that America would face devastating attacks. That includes on military bases the Americans have in the region and business interests they maintain. However, the Israelis have continued their strikes on Iran that have taken out military leadership as well as nuclear sites. That includes a centrifuge manufacturing plants around Tehran today. Now, there are some sites that haven't been hit, like the underground facility at Fordow. That likely would need American bunker-busting bombs to reach, and the Israelis have been signaling they'd like to see the Americans involved in this campaign. There isn't really a sign for a diplomatic off-ramp to this right now, and the rhetoric from Tehran has been pretty intense. But the Israelis are feeling pretty confident. They've relaxed some of the restrictions back in Israel on life there, and that's due possibly because of the number of missiles that Iran is firing into Israel has really dropped in the last couple of days, suggesting that Israel may have been able to take out a lot of these launchers, that maybe the arsenal isn't really as available as it once was, and that the Iranians may be potentially holding some back in case of an American involvement in this conflict. Now, one thing to keep in mind, though, is that the people of Tehran have voted with their feet. A lot of them have fled the capital city. Streets are empty there. Shops are closed. And those who remain are incredibly worried about what's going to happen next.
As leaders of Israel and Iran continue to attack each other with missiles, civilians pay a price. A Ukrainian makeup artist, Tatiana Kurakova, fled her native country in 2022 for Israel, thinking she'd arrived in a safer place. However, earlier on Sunday morning, an Iranian missile tore through the building next to hers, killing 9 people, injuring dozens, and destroying hundreds of homes, including Kurakova's. Here is her story.
Я розуміла, що прильот, але тоді я навіть не звернула увагу на цей дім, в який прилетіло, тому що я дуже швидко піднялася на другий етаж, там, де я живу, у свою квартиру. Я дуже швидко почала витаскувати чемодани, складати швидко свої речі, хоч якісь, тому що я розуміла, може бути зараз прильот, мені потрібно зібрати щось швидко, швидко, тому що я боялася, що зараз може завалитися дом, чи щось впасти, чи щось статися. Я боялась цього. Я думала треба схопити швидко дуже свої документи, бумаги, якісь там важливі речі і біжати. Звісно, це нагадує мені війну. Мені навіть сни не перепиняють снитися, як я десь прячусь, як я бігу від якихось шахедів, бомб і десь шукаю укриття. І тому я вважаю, що моя психіка вже порушена. Що я відчуваю? Я відчуваю жах внутрі і снаружи. І я відчуваю жах від всієї ситуації безісходності. Ви розумієте? Це дуже жахливо. Це кожен раз, як останній раз, ти не розумієш, чи виживеш ти зараз, чи ні. Чи прилетить десь так, що вже тебе навіть не знайдуть. Це кожен раз стрес, це жах. Це та причина, по якій я виїхала з України. Я думала, що цього тут не почнеться. Я не розуміла, що це можливо і тут.
Terrifying situation. Canada's spy agency says India is a continued foreign interference threat. The Canadian Security Intelligence Service's latest annual report says Indian officials and their proxy agents in Canada engage in a range of activities that try to influence Canadian communities and politicians. It comes as Canada renews diplomatic ties with India after Prime Minister Mark Carney met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the G7 in Alberta Tuesday. Tensions between the nations heightened last year when the RCMP accused Modi's government of having a role in murder and extortion on Canadian soil. The Prime Minister's office says Mark Carney will engage with allies at the NATO summit next week to meet evolving threats in a divided world. Carney will be heading to Europe on Sunday for the summits on NATO and Canada-EU relations to talk trade and defense. He's likely to sign a defense procurement agreement with the continent, which will allow Canada to join a €150 billion European loan program for joint defense projects. That was the word from European Union leaders at the G7 summit in Alberta on Tuesday. A 3-year-old Montreal girl missing since Sunday has been found alive on the side of a busy Ontario highway. Claire Bell was reported missing Sunday and had been the subject of an extensive search. Quebec provincial police say an Ontario police drone located her near St. Albert this afternoon. Police forces from both provinces are set to hold a joint news conference later today, but a Quebec police spokesperson says the girl was conscious and able to speak with officers when she was located. Her mother, 34-year-old Rachel Ella Todd, has been charged with child abandonment. Here in southern Alberta, a new buffalo hunt exhibit has been unveiled at Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump. The site northwest of Fort Macleod is located on the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy and invites visitors to connect with and gain a deeper understanding of Indigenous life and traditions. The exhibit is a partnership between the Piikani Nation, the Canadian Museum of History, and Alberta's government.
This World Heritage Site is a sacred place, a cultural bridge, and a living classroom. For over 6,000 years, this buffalo jump supported generations of Plains peoples, a testament to community, ingenuity, and survival. This exhibit brings those stories to life with honesty and care. It stands as an act of recognition, reminding young people, especially Indigenous youth, that their stories matter and their voices carry great strength.
You know, this entire jump, this entire center, really has done a lot to preserve our culture and our heritage. This new edition will add to that and educate people worldwide.
Well, starting next Wednesday, June 25th, the Lethbridge Transit is making changes to bus routes around the city. The initiative seeks to improve connectivity for areas of increasing demand. Darwin Jewell, General Manager of Transit and Transportation, says $240,000 is the cost of making these changes.
The reason we're doing that is to try to keep these buses more on time, which is exactly what customers want. Is they want to know when that bus is going to be there on time. So a lot of the other changes are to create more reliable transit service. This has no impact to our operating budget because in the last 2 years we've had a budget surplus. So we're reinvesting that surplus back into transit, creating a bit of a improvement in transit service, and we're planning that in perpetuity with our current operating budget.
We've seen a dramatic increase in ridership over the past 4 years. Basically, our pre-pandemic boarding ridership was about 2.1 million. In 2024, we had just over 2 million boardings. During this time, we've modified the routes to better serve our customers. We know this change comes midweek, and in order to assist in notifying our customers that these changes are coming, we are going to have our transit customer service ambassadors out at the various stations.
The routes affected are the number 1 Gold, the number 2 Blue, the 4 Orange, the 51 Red Crow, West Highlands, Southgate, and 60C Stafford Drive. Most people that are familiar with the city of Lethbridge understand it has an important hub for agriculture, education, and commerce. But Lethbridge is now developing to become a national leader in a new industry, quantum computing. On Wednesday, Economic Development Lethbridge alongside Super Q Quantum Computing announced the groundbreaking launch of Canada's first quantum super hub at the Tech Connect Innovation Facility. The new platform uses hybrid elements of CPU, AI, and quantum optimization to provide businesses, researchers, and entrepreneurs access to quantum computing tools to solve complex problems. By entering plain speech, the system can provide solutions to supply chain bottlenecks or manufacturing inefficiencies.
The quantum computing or the supercomputing happens in hardware that's not here, but this is an access terminal to those systems. And we are spinning up super hubs at targeted locations to provide access to strategic users, to evangelize the use of quantum and supercomputing in targeted sectors and targeted areas.
I think the industries that we have here are producing massive amounts of data. You know, when you think about agriculture alone, just in precision ag, in agri-food, agri-tech, we have manufacturing here, we've got supply chain, we have logistics. All of those have massive amounts of data that are often running into supply chain issues. We know with tariff, like how else do you calculate all of the impact that the tariffs might be happening on all parts of your operations. Now you have the ability to push all that data into one central place and maybe come up with some solutions you've never even thought of, pose the problem in ways that you've not been able to pose problems before, and see some results.
Businesses can begin exploring pilot projects this fall and have training provided through workshops and industry sessions. On Tuesday morning, Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services tackled a residential fire in North Lethbridge. Crews from 4 stations were dispatched at 7 a.m. to a house at the 1900 block of 6th Avenue North, where they encountered smoke and flames from the back end of the structure. They were quick to extinguish the fire before it could spread further. All residents were safely evacuated and no injuries were reported. Damages are estimated to exceed $250,000. And the investigation of the cause of the blaze continues. Lethbridge Family Services, or LFS, has announced a new program that offers a helping hand for newcomers. The Settlement and Community Support Services Initiative was reestablished in April of this year, and program coordinator Gregory Rabus says since then they've given assistance, referrals, and other support to more than 35 people.
So you come to the country, you have a lot of questions about what to do, how to navigate the system, and we're a free service. Questions about the permanent residence landscape. If you have questions about how to extend a work permit or what are the rules surrounding that, we can give you information and referrals about that. And also just getting involved with the community, learning what there is to do in Lethbridge, how to volunteer, how to practice your English. There's a lot of supports out there for people who come, for example, as permanent residents to Canada, but not very many supports, especially here in southern Alberta, for people who are temporary foreign workers or refugee claimants. Or maybe they hear from, friends and family, oh, you might want to do this, or maybe you could do that, but nobody is too sure. And so it's good to have a reliable source of information.
Lethbridge Family Services also offers interpretation and translation services in over 40 languages. The Edmonton Oilers and their fans are scratching their heads today, trying to figure out what went wrong. The Florida Panthers won their second consecutive Stanley Cup, beating the Oilers 5-1 in Game 6. The Panthers won the best of 7, 4-2, and left the Oilers looking for answers.
Lost to a really good team. Nobody quit. Nobody keep toweling. They're a heck of a team. You know, the Stanley Cup champions back-to-back for a reason. They tilted the rink. They were able to kind of stay on top of us all over the place. Never really able to generate any momentum off the ice. You know, we kept trying the same thing over and over, just banging our heads against the wall. So still a lot of confidence and belief. You know, I think people thought we were going to make it this far. We obviously believed. Just a short game.
In my opinion, I think it was just consistency. I think that was honestly it. They played a consistent game. They didn't change through the whole series. For sure, there's lessons. There's lessons as individuals, how you can show up better, how you can react better to certain situations. Also, as a team, how we need to learn from this right away. We need to learn from this right now.
Tough loss. So that's what some of the Oilers had to say. Here are some fans with their thoughts on the Oilers' loss.
Tough loss. They told us they haven't seen everything that they've got, and we still haven't seen it. Skinner didn't show up, but in the same time, neither did our big stars, McDavid, Draisaitl, even, throw Perry, those guys in there who are putting numbers up, didn't show up at all either, so they'll come back next year stronger.
Our defense is the whole reason we lost the cup. Nurse. I'm sorry, Nurse. You might be a wonderful guy outside of hockey, but right now I really don't like you, bro.
I thought that at the very least, I'm not saying we were going to win the cup, but I thought that we were going to win this game and bring it back home to Edmonton for at least a chance at it. And we looked like we didn't care. Everything Florida did was just better than what we did.
Some long faces there. Florida's Sam Bennett won the Conn Smythe Trophy as most valuable player in the playoffs. He had 15 goals in postseason action. Coming up next, a wet weekend ahead of us, but not before a beautiful Tuesday. We'll take a look at weather forecast coming up next.
Here's a look at the weather forecast. A couple more days of warm weather in Lethbridge before we see things change. Sunshine today, along with gusty west winds, 30 to 50 kilometers an hour, 28 for the high. Still nice tomorrow with a high of 27. We've got a UV index around 8 or 9, so that is fairly high. Careful with your sun exposure. We'll start to see the clouds rolling in Thursday night. Some showers on the way on Friday, 18 for the high. More rain forecast into Saturday, the low down to single digits. More rain on Saturday, cooler though, high of only 14. And then rain on Sunday with a high of 12. And the chilly night heading into Monday morning down to 5 degrees. We'll start to see the mercury climb early next week. Looking at the almanac, our average daytime high for this time of year is 23. Average low is 9. The record for this day was a scorcher, 33, set back in 2003. Record low of 0 was set way back in 1949. The sun rose this morning at 5:23 and will set tonight at 9:42 p.m. Across the country, starting out west, beautiful on the west coast, Vancouver and Victoria, both with sunny skies and a high of 20. Some showers in Edmonton, also the risk of some thunderstorms as well, high of 20. Calgary's under a severe thunderstorm watch. Conditions are favorable for storms that are capable of producing damaging wind gusts, damaging hail, and heavy rain, so keep an eye on the skies in Calgary. On the prairies, chance of showers in Saskatoon. Also a risk of some thunderstorms there as well, high 22. Hot in Regina, high up to 28. There is a chance of some thunderstorms as well. In Winnipeg, a mix of sun and clouds, 60% chance of showers or thunderstorms, high up to 23. And into central Canada, Ottawa, just a slim chance of showers, a high of 23. Also a chance of showers in Toronto and Montreal, 24 for the high in Toronto, 27 for the high in Montreal. And then as we head into the Maritimes, more wet weather there. 30% chance of showers in Fredericton, high 23. Same for Halifax, a slim chance of showers, a high of 21. St. John's with the skies clearing late in the day, high getting up to 17. And Charlottetown, a chance of showers and a high of 25.
DHL Express Canada has announced that they are suspending operations throughout the nation on Tuesday amid a strike and a lockout from their courier staff. Unifor, the union representing 2,100 employees, said that DHL plans to shut down all operations on Thursday, while DHL clarifying the shutdown on Friday instead, and the suspension of international imports on Monday. Workers have been striking since June 8th as both DHL and Unifor have met an impasse in contract negotiations, with Unifor seeking a 22% salary increase for hourly employees and 42% for owner-operators. A new survey finds less support among Canadians for the privatization of Canada Post. Survey results from the Angus Reid Institute found 59% say they're opposed to the government selling off Canada Post, while 47% of respondents say they are against privatizing some of the Crown Corporation. But many Canadians agree that changes are needed in Canada Post's operations. Canada's population saw almost no increase in the first quarter. Statistics Canada says the population rose by about 20,000 people from January to April to nearly 41,550,000. It was the sixth consecutive quarter of slower population growth after Ottawa decided last year to lower the levels of both temporary and permanent immigration. Canada admitted more than 100,000 immigrants in the first quarter of 2025, while net emigration totaled more than 17,000. The number of non-permanent residents dropped by roughly 61,000. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 18 points to 26,559. The Dow was down 44 points to 42,171. The S&P 500 was down 1 point to 5,980, and the Nasdaq was up 25 points to 19,546. West Texas Intermediate oil was up 30 cents to $75.14 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 13 cents to $3.98 US. Gold was up $3.20 to $33.89.80 US an ounce, and silver was down 22 cents to $33.86 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.76 per bushel, barley is at $6.95, canola is at $16.77, and corn is at $7.70 per bushel. Live cattle June contract was up $1.05 to $224.30. Feeder cattle August contract was up 82 cents to $304.17, and lean hogs July contract was up 52 cents to $112.17. And the Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 73.10 cents US.
Recapping one of our top stories, a 3-year-old Montreal girl missing since Sunday has been found alive on the side of a busy Ontario highway. Claire Bell was reported missing Sunday and had been the subject of an extensive search. Quebec Provincial Police say an Ontario police drone located her near St. Albert this afternoon. Her mother, 34-year-old Rachel Ella Todd, has been charged with child abandonment. Coming up next, Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, explains what Premier Smith is doing to prevent Minister Guilbeault from planning national parks in the way of potential pipelines. Plus, an update on the upcoming by-elections in 3 Alberta ridings. We will have all that and more. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or YouTube channel anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews.
Well, the G7 summit has wrapped up and now the post-game analysis begins. What was achieved and what was the benefit for Alberta? Also, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre prepares to run in a by-election in Alberta. And the federal government, or the Alberta government rather, makes moves to deal with tailings pond reclamation. Lots going on provincially, and here to help us wade through it all is Tyler Dawson. He is the legislative correspondent for the National Post. Tyler, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All the G7 photo ops certainly showed off Alberta to the world. How did our province fare, do you think, coming out of this?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, of course, this was in Alberta, but had nothing to do with Alberta in some ways. And yet in other ways, it's kind of all that anyone's been talking about for the last few days. Certainly we got all these leaders to Kananaskis, beautiful place, and from some of the reporting I've seen, the leaders seemed rather effusive in their praise about what Alberta looked like, saying it was, very beautiful and that sort of stuff. And I have to say, the weather more or less cooperated, with the exception of Tuesday, when they had to move a whole bunch. All the leaders were flying out Tuesday night. And of course, there's a big storm that sort of rolled through Calgary. And so they were scrambling to move all these meetings earlier in the day so that the leaders could get, I think a bunch of them flew by helicopter to get to the Calgary airport to get out before the storm hit, or waited out until after the storm had passed. So, it's a bit of a complicated question because, of course, this cost a lot of money, not Alberta's money necessarily, but it did shut down parts of the tourism sector for a couple weeks there. I think about 500 people canceled their reservations in Kananaskis country, according to the Alberta government. Obviously, some of the small businesses there would have seen an impact of this because they didn't have tourists coming through. So a bit of a win some, you lose some thing here, I think. And but overall, when we're talking about energy and critical minerals and some of this stuff that's really important to Alberta, those sort of discussions seem to be on the table at the G7. So you mentioned sort of post-game analysis, and maybe we don't know how some of that's going to shake out just yet. But I think overall, it seems positive in terms of what Alberta's sort of economic priorities are, and positive in terms of the exposure that this place has gotten sort of on the world stage.
Right. Well, since we're talking about parks, maybe let's jump to Premier Danielle Smith and talking about the development of national parks. She has said she does not want to see that. And this has to do with her old foe in Ottawa, Stephen Guilbeault. So let's talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, this is an interesting one as well. There's a handful of national parks currently under consideration in the country. None of them are in Alberta. There is one urban national park under consideration, which is being considered for Edmonton in the River Valley. Although that project is sort of sidelined at the moment, on pause, on hiatus, you could say. But the Liberals promised to make, I think it was 10 more national parks in their election campaign. And so there is some concern, there's some excitement on some sides and some concern on other sides that Alberta could get, another one or two of these parks. Premier Danielle Smith's fear is that, as you mentioned, her old foe, Stephen Guilbeault, is going to sort of pitch these national parks directly in the path of a new pipeline, or right where they want to build a new mine or oil sands facility or something like that. Is that true? Well, we don't have a parks proposal yet, and we don't necessarily have a pipeline proposal yet, but you can see where Smith's fear is coming from on this one. So this is a new configuration, let's say, of a very old fight between Alberta and Ottawa, and that's simply get out of our jurisdiction, don't make decisions that affect Albertans without consulting us. And the federal government, Stephen Guilbeault was asked about this last week or the week before, and he said, "Well, look, we don't just do it. We don't just come in and put up fences. There is consultation with the province and people who live there and all that kind of stuff." So the fact of the matter is, we just don't know what that might look like, if that's even going to happen. But certainly, Smith has drawn a line in the sand and said this is not going to happen without our input.
Let's jump to the federal by-election in the riding of Battle River Crowfoot. This, of course, to make way for conservative leader Pierre Poilievre to get back into the Commons. His numbers are dropping in the polls, though. Is any concern with this and the polling and how that could turn out?
No, I don't think so. Battle River Crowfoot is one of the most reliably conservative ridings in the country. It would be approaching sort of mathematical impossibility, I think, for the Conservatives to lose that riding. I mean, although, maybe I'll be totally wrong and I'll look like quite a fool whenever this election comes around. But I think it's almost about as certain as you can get that Pierre Poilievre is going to win a seat in the House of Commons. It's more a federal politics question of what it'll mean, right? Like, in terms of Poilievre will be back in the House of Commons, the dynamics will change because Andrew Scheer won't be leading sort of the in-house questioning anymore, that kind of stuff. Pierre Poilievre obviously being very good at all that. But I do think this will be the first time since Stephen Harper that we've had a leader of a party, or potentially future prime minister, who represents an Alberta riding. Is that going to change Pierre Poilievre's politics in Ottawa? Maybe not. What it could change, and this is actually a potential negative for the people of Battle River Crowfoot, is when you have a leader as your MP, how much attention are local issues going to get? This is something that all leaders struggle with a little bit, I think. Danielle Smith has certainly struggled with it a bit in her riding in Southern Alberta. You're so busy focusing on the big picture that when a constituent comes to you with some concern about a visa or a tax bill or disability payment, something like that, is your office going to be able to handle it? So I think that's a small angle on this, but it will actually affect some people in Alberta who will be voting in this by-election.
The Alberta government this week making an announcement about tailing pond reclamation. What's the plan there? I believe $50 million.
Yeah, so it's a competition. It's a $50 million pool, and private industry, private research groups, whatever, can basically bid on it and say, hey, we have this technology we're looking to develop that could help clean up tailings ponds. Can we have some seed money to get started, or some research money, things like that? So it's really it's not the government saying we're setting up a $50 million fund to try and fix the tailings ponds issue. They're saying there's money available for people who are scientists and entrepreneurial to sort of solve this problem for us. And it's a big problem. I mean, it's literally a big problem. There's 1.3 billion cubic meters of tailings ponds fluid in the province, and another 390,000 cubic meters of water that are in the tailings ponds. So these are like, you can see them from space, right? These are big, kind of gross areas, and the government is certainly looking to clean them up. And I think we know from so many of the previous PR campaigns against the oil sands that the tailings ponds are a really big problem, a really big image public relations problem for Alberta. So you can see that there's the environmental benefit of getting some of this stuff developed, some of this stuff done. There's also a really solid public relations case for coming up with ways to sort of reclaim, purify some of these areas around the oil sands.
Wouldn't it be safe to say, though, that critics have been talking about this for a long time? Aren't companies already looking into ways to deal with the tailings ponds, and this is just more money towards that?
Totally, yeah. I mean, you could certainly criticize this as do some of the richest companies in the world need any assistance from the government in coming up with some of this stuff? I get the sense from what the government said that this is sort of, are there, like, for example, the Calgary Herald talked to a fellow in Toronto, I think, who has been developing these sort of solar panel arrays that float on a tailings ponds and helps purify the water. I mean, I don't understand how they work, but there's maybe some niche ideas here, some outside the box kind of solutions that maybe oil companies haven't devoted the research to, or something like that. But a fiscal conservative certainly could take a look at this and say, well, do we need this? What is in effect a $50 million subsidy for research into this?
COVID is back in the news, and of course we know
it's always in the news, isn't it?
We know that means controversy. The Alberta government deciding to start charging for COVID vaccines instead of giving them away for free. Should we be surprised?
Well, that's a really good question that I hadn't anticipated, and the answer is, I think, both yes and no. I mean, there's plenty of vaccines that we have to pay for. If you're traveling to Southeast Asia and you need the rabies vaccine, you pay for that out of pocket. Most travel vaccines, I think, actually you pay out of pocket for. So there are vaccines that you pay for, but there are lots, obviously, that are covered as well. The flu shot comes to mind, measles vaccine comes to mind, even some more optional vaccines that not everyone gets are covered publicly. So in that, from a public health perspective, I think it's maybe surprising. I think that's probably fair to say. From a political standpoint, a little bit less surprising. This government has not been wildly enthusiastic about COVID measures in general, including vaccination. And one of the other big factors here is that the federal government actually sort of had a bunch of money set aside for paying for this. And so the province was not paying as much as a result. And so the federal government ended this program in January, meaning that the province was going to be stuck with the bill. And that bill last year, I don't know what the full bill was, but I do know that about 1 million doses of the COVID vaccine went unused last year at a cost of about $135 million. So there is a financial argument here saying that, we no longer have this funding stream for these vaccines, so we're going to have to make up that money somewhere else.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, worth noting that people living in, shelters, communal living spaces will not have to pay for it.
Exactly. The seniors will, though. I mean, that's one of the sort of cohorts of society that often how to phrase this without sounding totally rude, that often will get some of that stuff covered that younger people do not have covered, right? And that's not going to be the case in this situation. So big controversy, I think it's fair to say. The one thing that will dampen down the controversy, as in not make it worse, is that Health Canada is not getting involved. I think there was probably some question of whether or not Health Canada was going to do something about this, say something about this. They're not getting involved. It's all provincial jurisdiction at the end of the day.
This week, advanced polls opened up for 3 Alberta by-elections, including one that could determine the future of NDP leader Naheed Nenshi. What do you see happening in Edmonton, Strathcona?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the strongest NDP riding, one of the most faithful NDP ridings in the country, both federally and provincially. Rachel Notley's old riding, the riding that's been represented by the federal NDP since 2004, 2006, something like that. I think it's very likely that Naheed Nenshi wins this race. I think the UCP will put up a good fight on it, but I think the demographics of that neighborhood just really suggest that you're going to see an NDP victory there. The complete opposite is true in the old Didsbury Three Hills by-election. That's the former riding of Nathan Cooper, who was the Speaker of the House. He's now off to Washington to be our trade representative. Again, very conservative riding, likely to go UCP. The wild card there, though, is that Cam Davies, who's the leader of the Alberta Republican Party, or the Republican Party of Alberta, I can't remember which way they frame it, is running on a separatist ticket there. So that will be sort of our first test of this sort of nascent separatist movement, this revitalized separatist movement that we've seen in the last few weeks. But I think probably going UCP, at any rate going not NDP. I think that we can pretty much guarantee. And then Edmonton Ellerslie, this is Rod Loyola's old riding. He quit to go run for the federal Liberals in the last election, and then was booted off the Liberal ticket for some of his comments about Israel and Palestine. That is a little more of a wild card riding. I think that's fair to say. Edmonton is all New Democrat at this point. The UCP is going to put up a very strong fight in that riding. Of course, the analogous riding, it's not exactly the same boundaries federally, I believe did go to the Conservatives in the last federal election. So that'll be a little bit more maybe of a bellwether riding than the other two. I think that's fair to say.
We started off talking about parks, so let's finish off with parks in kind of an attached way. The Canada Strong Pass announced this week by Ottawa. What's the details? How does Alberta stand to gain with this discount for travelers?
Yeah, so it's basically a discounted parks passes and free parks entrance for people under the age of 17 and under, I think. What does this mean? Well, it means that a lot more people are going to be able to visit parks if they want. I mean, visiting a national park is not wildly cost prohibitive, especially when you factor in the travel time to get there, but it is still obviously a factor for lots of people. And the evidence for that is that in 2017, during the sesquicentennial, a word I haven't had to say since 2017, all these things were free, and parks visitation went way, way, way up that year. So positive in the sense that a lot more people are going to get to see these areas. We'll be able to do it at a reduced cost and experience some of the great outdoors. There is a downside, though, and that is just simply that more people causes problems in national parks. I mean, I was in Banff over the weekend for the G7, and it was a madhouse, an absolute madhouse. And you can imagine that residents get frustrated by this to some extent. You can imagine businesses probably like it because they're making more money. There's also an impact on ecosystems and wildlife when you have more and more people about. Maybe some of these people don't, show sort of proper respect for nature when they're out there. So it's a bit of a, there's one side and there's another side on this, I think it's fair to say. But Alberta, I expect to be a major beneficiary of this. And that's just because we have two of the busiest parks in the country in Banff and Jasper, not to mention Waterton, Elk Island, and Wood Buffalo. We just have a lot of national parks and they're all pretty accessible. So I do think we're going to see a tourism bump from that with both of its good sides and its downsides.
Tyler, appreciate your time with us today. Thanks for your insight.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Tyler Dawson, legislative correspondent for the National Post.
Immigration continues to be a concern for Canadians. Now, a new study from Cardis, a nonpartisan Canadian Christian think tank, says federal and provincial governments need to recognize churches and other faith communities as trusted partners in helping immigrants settle into life in Canada. Joining us from Ottawa is Reverend Dr. Andrew Bennett. He is the Faith Communities Program Director at Cardis. Good to have you with us, Dr. Bennett.
Thanks very much. It's wonderful to be with you.
Now, can you explain how you went about doing the research on this study? Because you interviewed a number of pastors across Canada.
So this study that we just recently put out builds upon a lot of other work that we've done at Cardis through polling with the Angus Reid Institute in Vancouver, BC. And that polling data gives us a baseline for how Canadians engage with religious faith. And one of the data points that we've looked at in the past is the religiosity of new Canadians, of immigrants. And what we found is that immigrants are more likely to be more religious than Canadians who are born in Canada. Wow. So we wanted to explore that a little bit more. And so in this relatively short study, we interviewed a number of Christian pastors from across the country, principally in Ontario and BC, to look at what is their experience in dealing with predominantly or largely immigrant congregations, and what are some of the challenges they're seeing that their congregants are facing, those who are new arrivals to Canada.
Now, the study, first of all, suggests that our federal government recognized churches and other faith communities as trusted partners in immigrant integration. How open is our federal government to taking advice from and working with Canada's religious community?
Well, historically, the federal government has been very open, as have all levels of government. In fact, if we look at one particular area of policy, and that would be refugee resettlement, historically, the federal government has always partnered with faith communities to help resettle refugees. And for many years, I'm not sure if it's still the case, but certainly for many years, the largest refugee settlement organization in the country after the federal government itself was the Office of Refugees of the Archdiocese of Toronto, so the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Toronto, which particularly during the Syrian refugee crisis was responsible for settling hundreds of refugees. So that relationship has been there historically. And I think often at a very local level, Canadians know that faith communities play significant roles in their local communities, not just in terms of refugee resettlement or support for immigrants, but providing a whole range of services that people can draw upon, whether it's putting your kids in the Girl Guides or the Boy Scouts, or taking advantage of a 12-step program or an In From the Cold program. They know that religious people, particularly Christians, because we're the most numerous in the country, have this role in the local community. But I think what happens sometimes is as we get up to higher levels of administration and government, there's often a bit of an amnesia that faith communities, and in the case of this study, Christian churches play these very important roles. And so often I think government forgets the need to engage these communities because often they have very specific awareness and knowledge and experience of working with immigrants in this case. And so I think it really behooves government to be engaged with churches, with other faith communities that are doing this work that in many cases government simply cannot do on its own. And so they have to recognize the role that has been always played by faith communities in local communities in the country.
Now, you say that immigrants face systemic barriers through the process of applying for permanent residency and that they should be given clearer expectations with regard to timelines?
That's correct. I think one of the major challenges that immigrants face when they come to Canada, they are not fully aware of the lengthy processes that are involved in going from being landed as a permanent resident, a landed immigrant, becoming a permanent resident, and then eventually, becoming a Canadian citizen. And in some cases, that is even more complicated for those that come in as refugees who are not, let's say, convention refugees. So I think often the expectations are that things will go a little bit more smoothly. And we know from the experience of many, many immigrants that that's not always the case, that things get delayed. They're not aware of how to negotiate kind of the administrative apparatus. They're new to the country. And so being thrown into all the bureaucracy that's involved in the immigrant resettlement, the immigrant settlement process, it's a real challenge for them. And they get frustrated. They don't know how to navigate it. And so they look to their faith community quite often as that community that can provide that support for them to help get them through this period. So I think, again, governments would do well to engage with churches, to engage with faith communities across the country, to really get a sense of what those local people are experiencing and to help those faith communities provide support for them.
Now, I would guess that for many immigrants, there can be challenges in learning to communicate well in English or French. I've heard that English is one of the hardest to learn as a second language. So what would you like to see take place to help newcomers learn one or both languages?
Well, of course, I think it's essential for people to be able to settle fully into the country that they learn one of the two official languages. And that just allows them obviously to integrate more fully into the social structures that we have in Canada. And churches, again, and other faith communities can be those places where those skills are acquired. And there are a lot of faith communities across the country, churches in particular, that are offering English as a second language program. So I know my church, for example, in Ottawa, I'm a Ukrainian Greek Catholic deacon. And so our Ukrainian Catholic parish here in Ottawa has received, since the escalation of the war in Ukraine, a lot of displaced Ukrainians coming to Canada fleeing the war. And in many cases, they simply don't have adequate English language skills so as to be able to make use of their often very highly acquired skills that they have to be able to find work and so forth. So our church is providing them with English language acquisition. And often that is done on a voluntary basis. It's not done with government funding. It's done simply out of the goodness of people's hearts. And so again, it's often at this very local level where faith communities play a major role in providing essential services to new Canadians. And government can't always step into that role because it's very, very local, and often they're not aware of the local dynamics. But the local faith community is, because they're seeing these people on a daily basis. They're trying to find ways to engage with them, get them integrated into the community, and so they know them the best. And so they can often provide very nicely tailored settlement services, such as English language as a second language acquisition, that government can't provide. So government needs to see in these faith communities, in these churches, a tried, trusted, and true partner that can really help as part of the immigrant settlement process.
Your study revealed that there is a certain amount of fear and uncertainty for immigrants, and when faced with communicating with government agencies for various services, there can be a hesitancy to ask questions.
Well, I think especially when we consider immigrants that are coming from countries that they are fleeing as a result of persecution. So maybe they are facing persecution for their religious faith. Maybe they are facing persecution because of their ethnicity. And often the persecutors are the governments, their own governments that they are fleeing. And so when they come to a new country, even though they might fully appreciate that they're coming to a functioning democracy where they don't need to fear the government as they did in their home country, there still can be some trepidation as to, well, how do I engage with government? Can I trust them? Can I trust this person that I'm dealing with, maybe who's at providing immigrant settlement services for me at the government level? So I think, again, that's where a faith community, a religious community, a church can help to assuage those fears that people have and help them to become more socialized when it comes to, well, here in Canada, here's what government does. It's a democratic government. There are checks and balances on how governments act. The government doesn't actively, persecute people. You're safe here. But for someone who's just arrived from maybe a war-torn country, it takes some time, obviously, to help them through that. And so again, this is a very important role that a faith community can play, where you have people that they are engaging with that speak their language, that are of their same faith tradition. Maybe they have, common family back home in the home country. So again, there's that local knowledge, there's that local sensitivity to the human person that a Christian church or another faith community can provide.
Now, it's interesting that at the beginning of the interview, you alluded to that surveys show that immigrants, Canadians, are on average significantly more likely to be religiously committed as compared to non-immigrants. So it stands to reason that faith groups would be key to proper integration. So would you like to see financial and structural support from the government on this?
Yeah, I think there are varying types of support. I think one of the most important things is to ensure that governments are aware of the role of religious groups and of faith communities, and that, for example, their charitable status is crucial to them. So these faith communities are receiving funds from their congregants that are helping to support not just what that community, that faith community, that parish, that congregation is doing for their own people, but what they're doing for the community around them, including people that are not members of their congregation. So we've detailed a lot of this in our work at Cardis through something called the HALO Project. And the URL for that is haloproject.ca. And through the HALO Project, we demonstrate that the money that is taken in by a congregation is put back into the community, and there's a significant multiplier effect for money that is received and then what is provided in terms of goods and services by that faith community, not simply for their own people, but for the broader community. And so I think government needs to be aware of the role that faith communities play, and maybe not necessarily give them money, but provide them the ability to function as charitable entities and to ensure that that charitable status is guarded because of the important work that these communities are doing for all Canadians, not just simply for their own co-religionists.
And I would think that help for newcomers to find jobs would be a huge priority. And again, the church would be a great place to offer support in this area. Even me as a non-immigrant, I got my start in TV just by getting involved with my church. Any thoughts on how this can be worked out, practically speaking?
You know, I remember speaking with the Archbishop Emeritus of Toronto, Cardinal Collins, and he was obviously had that broad oversight for the Office of Refugees of the Archdiocese. And when you commit to be a sponsorship agreement holder, you commit to provide a full year's worth of funding to a new refugee to help them get settled in the country. And I remember that Cardinal Collins said to me that at that time, and this would have been, I think, probably around 2018, the Archdiocese had not had to pay out a full year's worth of support for a refugee because they were so effectively settled in jobs and they're so effectively integrated in the community by that parish that was supporting them that 1 year commitment did not have to be fully met because they were integrated so effectively. And so after that first year, they had the support they needed. In many cases, they had jobs. They had the ongoing skills development that they needed because the parish was able to integrate in such an effective manner because of the local nature of the parish. And I think sometimes when you have a somewhat overcumbersome bureaucracy at the federal level, or perhaps at the provincial level, they're not able to be as nimble as something at the local level. And so that nimbleness that a faith community can provide is, I think, really undervalued at times.
That's just fascinating, yet such a simple solution, right in front of the government, right under the government's nose there. Now, are you hopeful that the government will respond to this report and offer some support?
I'm always hopeful. The hope really is that we can disseminate the report effectively enough so that people are reading it and those that are involved in policy making can, be first of all interested in the report and then hopefully reach out to us and enter into a discussion on policy recommendations that we have in the report. So I'm certainly grateful for being able to speak to you today, and we look for other opportunities to make this report better known, certainly within government circles above all.
Reverend Dr. Andrew Bennett is the Faith Communities Program Director at Cardis. Dr. Bennett, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
I'm Naveen Day on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.